Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, I'm happy to be with you today, live from Big Daddy Unlimited Studios in Gainesville, Florida. And boy, do we have a great show for you lined up today. We're going to start by talking about LyaWhopper. That's what I call old Pocahontas. President Trump calls her Pocahontas. I actually think that LyaWhopper fits her much better. But Elizabeth Warren, is back on the scene, and in the middle of the Biden campaign, she has now become a top advisor to Joe Biden, and we're going to talk about that. And then Pelosi is on the warpath. You talk about someone who, I don't know if she claims to be a fake Indian or what, but old plastic face herself, Nancy Pelosi, is on the warpath, man. She said a couple of days ago when we talked on the show that they were going to have to fumigate the White House to get Donald Trump out of it. And now she's doubling down on that, and she's one-upping the president in calling the Wuhan virus the Trump virus, and basically America is suffering from the Trump virus, and we'll expand on that. And then I got to talk about an old buddy of mine. Hopefully we'll get to it at the end of the show here. None other than Congressman Ted Yoho, and I'll explain our relationship in just a moment. We are I feel very confident to say that Mr. Yoho and myself are very good friends. Well, he has made national news now because he's being accused of calling Ocasio-Cortez the B word on the steps of the Capitol. So we'll expand upon that, man. And I got to tell you, if anyone deserves it, she does. And I don't know, Ted's capable of something like that, I'm sure. But we'll get into the ins and outs of that later in the show. But we start with LyaWhopper, Elizabeth Warren. This is an AP story. Elizabeth Warren's new role: key Joe Biden policy advisor. So now she, all of this stuff is coming together. We got the Game of Thrones, basically, is what this is becoming behind Joe Biden. And you've got Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez and now Elizabeth Warren, apparently all working together for the common goal of putting or propping old Joe Biden up on the jukebox after he dies inside the White House, because Joe Biden has barely got a pulse. Washington. Joe Biden accused Elizabeth Warren last year of holding an angry, unyielding viewpoint. In other words, he basically said she's an angry B word. She embraced that label and slammed Biden as naive for thinking he could work with Republicans as president. She warned Democrats against picking a Washington insider. And man, is she right about that. I mean, there's no more of a Washington insider than Joe Biden. She pointedly refused to endorse Biden until weeks after exiting the race. Well, she probably wanted to get paid or something, Maybe she was on a vision quest, a dream quest or something, because we all know that she's not only a Cherokee Indian, but the whitest woman by her own DNA test that may have ever lived on the planet Earth. But this, going back to what she said there about Joe Biden, that might be the most honest she was in the entire campaign. But her campaign was built upon lie after lie after lie. And I think the American people, Democrats, even the progressives, were worried that, you just can't build your whole campaign on a house of cards, foundation of lies. But the one thing I would kind of interesting there, where she talks about Joe Biden and his inability or the not being able to work with Republicans, she's inferring not that Joe's not willing to do it, I don't think, but that you can't work with Republicans. Well, on this, I would dispute Elizabeth Warren's characterization of Joe Biden, because Biden is fully capable in the past of working with Republicans for the detriment of the country, by the way. And I have no doubt, here's something I want to just make real clear. The Democrats, I think when President Trump was first elected, because she uses the word naive in here, and I'm going to use it in reference to President Trump. The one thing that I would say that President Trump was naive about, or maybe he was just overly hopeful, if that's the right way to put it, that he really believed that once the election was over, that the Democrats, keep in mind, he'd worked with Democrats on many projects. He had supported Democrats. You know, he was a multi-billion-dollar businessman, so he needed the support of Democrats, especially in a place like New York City. So Donald Trump was accustomed, and I don't say this as any criticism, it's just a matter of fact. Donald Trump, the man, before he was president, was used to working with Democrats. He didn't have a choice. You know, if you're going to be a smart, successful businessman, you'd have to work in his situation with Democrats. But I think he was either naive or maybe overly hopeful that once the election was over, regardless of how much they attacked him in the run-up to his presidency, that they would put bygones aside and that they would come together. And he really believed, I think, in his heart that he was uniquely qualified to work in a bipartisan fashion. And I think he's absolutely right that he was, but they weren't having it. There was no way. You know, the Mitch McConnell was condemned for saying when Barack Obama got elected that he wanted to make Obama a one-term president. And I can understand why people would say that, but really and truly, if you think about it, all he was saying is, we want to make sure that Obama doesn't get reelected. Now, that may be harsh, but he's the leader of the Republican Party, in effect, at that time. And he was just stating, for the record, at least he was being honest. Turn to what happened to Donald Trump. It would be progress for the Democrats to say, oh, we want Donald Trump to only be a one-term president, because they doubled down, man. They didn't want Donald Trump to even serve out his presidency. So what the Democrats did and are doing to President Donald Trump is tenfold worse than what Mitch McConnell said by any stretch. But, of course, the media makes it sound like they're equal at best, and they are not. But this idea, I want to get back to this idea of bipartisanship, because my definition of bipartisanship is Republicans cave. When you hear, oh, we got a bipartisan agreement, that means Republicans cave. Because I really would like to hear, I've put this challenge out there and no one yet has risen up to it. If you could show me an example where Republicans were for something and the Democrats were opposed to it, and they persuaded the Democrats to come over enough of them to get in the Republican camp that it passed, I'd like to see it. Because it's hard for me to find an example. I'm not saying there's not one out there, but there ain't many, if any, and they're very difficult to find. But you can find tons of examples where Democrats were for something, Republicans at least verbally said they were opposed to it, and Republicans caved in completely. Obamacare is a great example of that, by the way. And so bipartisanship means Republicans cave every time. So I am completely confident in this, and I don't say it with any happiness, that if Joe Biden, God help us, actually becomes president of the United States, I have no doubt he'll be able to work with some of the Republicans in Congress, because they'll be jumping over themselves to try to be bipartisan. You know, they'll let Joe Biden serve out his term. I don't know if nature will let him serve out his term, but I think the Republicans, there are many of them that'll be glad he's up there. And some of them are never Trumpers, but some of them just are in the quiet in the back. Do you really think it matters to people like Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, who believe that they're just waiting on their turn at the trough? You know, I'm going to talk about my buddy Ted Yoho here in a minute, but he had one of the best political commercials, and I've played it before. Maybe we'll play it again sometime, about pigs at the trough. Just look at it, Ted Yoho, pigs at the trough, and you'll see it's one of the great ones, because I maintain that, and I got this from a good buddy of mine, a mentor of mine, Tom Hayes Morrison. Good morning, buddy. How are you? He said that when it comes to the top there of the party, there's not much difference. That we have one party, as he liked to put it, and it's the party of big government. It has a left wing and a right wing, and I think he's right about that, and they're just waiting for their turn at the trough. And I say that, do you really believe, and I'm not saying Mitch McConnell is not for President Trump, but do you think Mitch McConnell would have any problem trying to work with a Joe Biden? I don't think so. Now, Chuck Schumer, under normal circumstances, might be able to work with a president, a Republican president. They just can't get past Trump derangement syndrome. But I am, 100% confident that should the disastrous thing happen that Joe Biden become president, there'll be plenty of Republicans willing to work with him on a bipartisan fashion. I have no doubt about that. But back to this article. Now those bitter primary, this is about Elizabeth LyaWhopper Warren, by the way, in case you're just tuning in, helping Joe Biden. Now those bitter primary clashes between Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden are a distant memory. Warren, a Massachusetts senator and leading progressive, has become, they're all progressives, by the way. There's no such thing as a moderate Democrat, not in holding office. They're all varying degrees of progressives. There's just no question about that, and Biden is certainly one. Has become an unlikely confidant and advisor to Biden, the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee. They, talking about LyaWhopper, Elizabeth Warren, and Biden, talk every 10 days or so, according to aides to both politicians who spoke on condition of anonymity to freely describe their relationship. Those forums have provided opportunities for Warren to make a case on top policy issues to Biden, who ran a more centrist primary campaign. Did Biden even run a primary campaign? I don't know if you could call it centrist. Biden didn't even run a primary campaign. Keep in mind, this is how bad Biden's campaign was. Leading into Super Tuesday, the make or break of all primaries in presidential politics, the first Super Tuesday, so to speak. You know how much Biden has spent in money in those areas on TV ads and anything? Nothing. Zero. He had spent nothing. Give you an example. In Massachusetts, which he beat Elizabeth Warren in her home state, the guy had spent a total leading up to that primary of 10 grand. A total. And he beat her in her own place. So it has nothing to do with his campaign. His campaign was lousy. It had everything to do, by that time, Super Tuesday had already come in for Joe Biden, by the way. Massachusetts wasn't on that, was later on. Elizabeth Warren dropped out right after that. But Joe Biden ran a lousy campaign. They simply anointed him because they realized that to stop Bernie Sanders, the establishment Democratic Party, they wanted to stop Bernie Sanders is why they got behind Joe Biden. That is the only reason, not because they thought he was a great candidate. And I like this part where they say in the article here that Elizabeth Warren is an unlikely confidant and advisor to Joe Biden. See, that assumes of the old Joe Biden still exists. That remnants of Joe Biden, the guy that's been in politics for 50 years and is now the answer, is, he still exists. And I hate to tell you, there's very little of Joe Biden left. If Joe Biden were still the guy he was, of course he wouldn't have got this far if he was. But if he were the guy who'd run for president a couple of times earlier, he and Elizabeth probably would have clashed and never made up. But Joe Biden, as I've been calling, I'm going to start calling him, I got a new nickname for Joe, Tabula Rasa Joe. In other words, he is a blank slate, man, and that's why they like him. He's an open canvas. He has no agenda. Joe Biden is the perfect candidate for these progressives because he doesn't have an agenda. He's not, pushing his agenda aside for theirs. He's just a blank slate, fill in the blank. So Elizabeth Warren is simply waiting for her turn at the trough as well, because I'm firmly convinced that the power behind the throne now, if Joe Biden is successful, is right now Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez. Ocasio-Cortez would be Biden's pick for VP if she was of age. But he just can't, he'd love to sniff that hair in the Oval Office, don't you think? But Elizabeth Warren is trying to get her seat in there. I don't think she's going to be vice president because it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. He's going to pick someone of color, most likely. But I could see her being in his cabinet, and the article actually talks about that. But Joe Biden is tabula rasa Joe, man. He's a blank slate for them to just fill in the blanks wherever they want. He adopted Warren endorsed plans on personal bankruptcy, expanding Social Security benefits, and canceling student loan debt for millions of Americans. She also helped devise important portions of his post-pandemic economic recovery proposals. Basically, he adopted her proposal. Everything is free. Tax the rich, whoever they are. Now, you'll know if there's any remnants left, of Joe Biden. You'll know if there's any remnant of the old Joe left if he stands firm on helping the credit card companies, because that is one area where Joe, man, has done a yeoman's job, so to speak, while he was a senator, is he has always stood up for the credit card companies. If you're wondering how credit card companies can charge you 25, 30% and more in big fees if you miss anything, payments or whatever, if you're wondering how all that came about, you can thank Joe Biden. That is his major accomplishment in the legislature, is actually propping up credit card companies. But so you will see if there's anything left of it. Warren, meanwhile, is lending Biden her progressive credentials and frequently hosts campaign events for him, including one recent fundraiser that brought in $6 million. That's impressive. Only former Vice President Barack Obama secured a greater haul. Now, I thought that the Democrats were trying to take money out of politics. It certainly doesn't seem that way. Now that they have the power, see, winning cures everything. Now that they feel like they're on the verge of having the presidency, keeping the House, and possibly taking over the Senate, money is no issue. You know, they welcome billionaires who are the big donors to the Democratic Party. If you want to know just how full of it they are right now, how they're feeling their oats, so to speak, they're already, they being the Republicans in the Senate, Chuck Schumer was asked about this just the other day and said everything is on the table. They're actually talking about doing away with the filibuster when it comes time. You know, the filibuster basically means you got to have 60 senators to move anything forward. And they're talking about doing away with something that's been going on for over a couple hundred years. Now, I have mixed feelings about the filibuster myself, but the Democrats have never really wanted to overturn it in the past. But now they're already talking about it as if they've already won. Biden has promised to pick a woman as his vice president and has faced pressure from African American activists to choose a black running mate as an acknowledgement of their political importance and a response to institutional racism. Warren, who is white, can she prove it? she proved that. One thing Elizabeth Warren proved during her campaign for president was that she was one of the whitest women that has ever lived. So it's a definitive statement. She is white. Nonetheless, remains a finalist. It's scary to think that she could be president of the United States, because a lot of people speculate that whoever the VP pick is will ultimately be president, either de facto in a sense that they are the power behind the throne, as I say, tabula rasa Joe, or that Joe won't survive. I'm not wishing that on him, by the way, and that Elizabeth Warren or someone else would step in. I don't believe that she's going to be, as I say, VP earlier. I think right now she is playing a role in the campaign for herself. She's trying to carve out room for herself. But the real power behind the throne right now, I believe at the moment, is Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez. And, we'll see. Even if Warren isn't chosen, according to this article, she could easily take on the role of Treasury Secretary or lead the Federal Reserve, where Chair Jerome Powell's term ends in 2022. That would ensure Warren continues to be an important voice in the Biden administration. Boy, will our money policy go to a heck in a handbasket if she actually were chair of the Federal Reserve. But the big question for her is, can she get along with Bernie and Ocasio-Cortez? You know, her and Bernie fought for the progressive movement they were a big rival in 2020. And a lot of Bernie supporters cannot stand Elizabeth Warren. And I don't know what Ocasio-Cortez's feelings about her are. But can she get along with them? If she can, then she could be in the cabinet, and she could do something like that Federal Reserve. And I've got to thinking about this Game of Thrones analogy, because it really is starting to look like that behind the scenes. I mean, Joe Biden is king in name only if he actually gets there. Who are the different characters? You know, who would Bernie Sanders be? Would he be like Littlefinger or the eunuch guy? Which one? Because he's one of those two. And Ocasio-Cortez, what would she be? So if you want to play, let's play the Game of Thrones game. Chime in on Facebook. Let me know what characters you think in Game of Thrones are Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, because that's what seems to be happening in the Biden campaign, because, basically the king, Joe Biden, is like the other kings in Game of Thrones, is kind of being puppeted from behind the scenes. So tell me, chime in on Facebook. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And by the way, howdy, how are y'all? Good morning on Facebook. Pelosi, we're going to move on to another story here, and this is from Real Clear Politics. Pelosi, America is suffering from the Trump virus. So President Trump had a conference yesterday, an update, a coronavirus press conference update, and he led right out the gate by calling it the Wuhan or the China virus, one of the two, I can't remember. Kudos to him for staying true to that. He doesn't cow down. He ain't bowing down. He is Trump, staying Trump, and that's what we love about him. I know some of y'all out there may hate it about him, but I love it about him that he didn't pout. He just came out and boom. And there was speculation, would he actually wear a mask? I had no doubt that he would not, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But Pelosi is calling it the Trump virus. Now, is that racist? I don't know. Is that against, the redhead, redskin, orange man, Trump, Cheeto president? I mean, is that against people with orange skin and orange hair? I mean, I don't know. LyaWhopper could probably answer that. But in an interview with CNN on Tuesday, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said the nation is suffering from the Trump virus or the results of President Trump's handling of the virus. So Nancy is saying it's the Trump virus. Are you saying that you're the cure? I mean, that's a scary thought. Am I pretty? She's like the cure. She's conjuring up a witch's brew to cure the virus, the Trump virus. But Pelosi said on CNN, I think with the president's comments today, he recognized the mistakes he has made by now embracing mask wearing and the recognition that this is not a hoax. It's a pandemic that has gotten worse before, these are Pelosi's words, before it will get better. Because of his inaction and the fact clearly it is the Trump virus. And so, I told you this, I warned you about this, and I'm not knocking the president, but they made the mask wearing a controversy, they being the mainstream media and the Democrats, because they were trying to set it up for just this kind of thing, that once President Trump wore a mask, and I think he was right to wear a mask going into the Walter Reed Hospital, where our great soldiers are recovering from their injuries there. I got no issue with President Trump wearing a mask. And I thought his answer to Chris Wallace this past Sunday in an interview where he said, I'm not opposed to wearing masks. I just don't believe it should be federally mandated. I don't believe I should be like the mask czar and he should leave it up to local governments. I thought that was a perfect answer. But of course, the Democrats want an all-powerful president. They don't want it to be Donald Trump, but they use this. I warned you that if Trump ever wore a mask for any reason, it would be sign of weakness to them. It wouldn't be a sign of, he's showing leadership or anything. It would be like Nancy Pelosi is saying, by President Trump wearing a mask, she says that he is showing that he was wrong about it all along, when President Trump actually did not have that strong of an opinion on masks one way or another. Did you see I don't know if you watched President Trump's update on the coronavirus yesterday. Now, it was different. It's the first one he's done, I think, since April. It was different than the ones in the past. He had no, quote, experts behind him. He was the only one that spoke, and he took a handful of questions and walked off. If you haven't seen it, you can go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page. I hope you'll like it and share it with others while you're there. And the video from that is on there from yesterday's press conference. But President Trump said a couple of things that they bashed him on now in the mainstream media. One was that he said it's going to get worse, talking about the virus, before it gets better. But he also then turned around and said, we're going to whip this thing. I thought he did an excellent job, but that's the one headline that the mainstream media, going to get worse, virus. So that's inevitable. And then the one that's kind of silly and controversial, I suppose, is he was asked about that gal, Ghislaine, I think her name is, the one that was Jeffrey Epstein's recruitment gal that's in prison right now. He was asked about her, and he ultimately said, I wish her well. And they're basically now saying, he's wishing a pedophile a criminal well and all that. I didn't get that from that. I think what he was trying to do is be kind of sly and funny, saying, I hope she doesn't commit suicide while she's in there, because we'd like to actually hear from her. But of course, the mainstream media and even some people on the right, so to speak, I was listening to today, were criticizing President Trump for wishing her well. I think they're taking it out of context, but he probably should have worded it different. But he can't win no matter what, because as I often say, President Trump could be walking on water on the mall reflecting pool there at the Washington Monument, and the headline out of New York Times be Trump can't swim. So, I don't know how much of that. But CNN host Wolf Blitzer back. This is back to Billy Bob tells me to get back to it. Billy Bob, if you hadn't seen my show before, first of all, welcome to it. But where you been? But he's my psychic sidekick. Yeah, some of us are sicker than others, and I'm a fish whisperer. Make fishing great again. He keeps me straight, but he says get back to it. And so what we're talking about, or at least we should be, is Nancy Pelosi calling it the Trump virus in an interview yesterday on Wolf Blitzer's show. CNN host Wolf Blitzer asked, "What do you mean when you say the Trump virus? What do you mean when you call it that?" She said that the Trump virus, if he had said months ago, let's wear masks, there again the mask, and let's socially distance instead of rallies. So in other words, knocking a rally instead of having a rally, we're just going to have a mostly peaceful protest instead of rallies and whatever they were, then more people would have followed his lead. He's the president of the United States. Well, before I get into that, I want to update you on something I talked about, because I had a tremendous amount of response. I even had some phone calls from some people who have my number and stuff like that when I talked about what's happening in Portland and Chicago and everything else. And something I said yesterday, I guess, rang true, and I want to say it again. In my opinion, the protests are over. The protests are over. The George Floyd protests, they're over. And I don't mean there are not still people out there, but the protests are over. What we have now is armed insurrection. So and I say that to say this, if you are a person that is out there trying to peacefully protest, my advice to you is to go home. Go home. I'm not saying you're not legitimate, but go home, because your movement, whatever legitimacy it had, has been totally taken over by left-wing Marxist communists like Black Lives Matter, by fascist Nazis like Antifa. It has been taken over. And what is happening in the streets of America today is not a protest. It is an armed insurrection designed to bring down the United States of America. So I say again, if you are a person who is trying to peacefully protest, my suggestion is realize your protest is over. It's been hijacked. Go home, because this is not going to end well. I'm telling you right now. I just wanted to get that out because I had a lot of response. Back to this article. But she says here, I want to read this again. Trump virus, she has asked what she meant by that. And Pelosi said, the Trump virus, if he had said months ago, let's wear masks and let's socially distance instead of rallies, whatever they were, then more people would have followed his lead. He's the president of the United States. Well, the good thing out of that, she finally admitted that, because for the longest time, she even admitted that she's been trying to impeach President Trump for over 3 years, going all the way back to right after he got inaugurated. So she actually admitted his president's a big thing. But Nancy Pelosi, let me tell you about Nancy Pelosi. One thing about her, she is the ultimate politician. There's just no question about that. She is a politician extraordinaire, because she actually believes her own lying BS. She believes in her heart this stuff. She is convinced herself. And that takes talent to be such a consummate liar that you actually believe your lie is the truth. That, is ultimately why she's so successful, and probably why some people call her, an evil witch as well. But Pelosi said, I think a good deal of what we have suffered, talking about coronavirus and I guess the economy as well, is clearly the Trump virus. So that got me to thinking about this. First of all, the audacity of any of these Democrats to actually lay this on Trump like they would do better, because they had no plan for the coronavirus whatsoever. In fact, and let's go ahead and show the timeline. And I've shown this before. Check this out. The timeline of some of the Democratic leaders, including Nancy Pelosi, where she literally, after President Trump had shut down the borders from China, or flights coming in from China, she actually said that that you should just go into Chinatown and party like it's 1999, basically. So let me ask you this, Miss Pelosi. What would the death toll, because they're all about the death toll, you know, the hundreds of thousands of Americans dying, and I'm not trying to knock the people dying. If you have lost a loved one with the coronavirus, it is a unique and special tragedy to you for sure. But what would the death toll, Nancy, be if we listened to people like you? Keep in mind that there's an entity out there in Washington State. I want to say it's connected to Washington University. I could be wrong, but it's become the guru of projections of viral outbreaks and the death tolls and all that. They were saying as little as a year or so ago that the death rate by this time of the virus would be 2.5 million people. And that is if we do what we're supposed to do. 2.5 million people, and they're considered still to be the gurus. Now, they lowered that considerably to like 250,000 or something like that, but it was 2.5 million people. So, you know, that gets me to think, what would they be saying if Barack Obama were still president or a Joe Biden were president at this time? God help us if either of those things. But don't you think the fact that President Trump reacted when he did, and the actual numbers of people dying from this disease, tragic as it is, are so low? They would actually be touting the exact plan that the president has put forward as an amazing success story. Only because of Trump derangement syndrome and not wanting to give him an inch is this a total disaster. Because think about it. They projected 2.5 million. It's a fraction of that. It should even be lower. Like President Trump is always saying, one death is one too many. But it would be seen under Obama as a major success story. I don't have any doubt about that. All right, we got a few minutes left, and I want to get into this story here about my good friend Ted Yoho. And this is coming to you from Politico. Democrats defend Ocasio-Cortez after tense exchange with GOP lawmaker. And they're talking about my good friend Ted Yoho. Democrats are rallying to the defense of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It seems like I have to say it that way. I have to whisper it or say it really loud. After she was because I just can't be neutral about her. After she was reportedly verbally harassed by Republican lawmaker outside of the Capitol on Monday. Well, let me tell you, this congressman in particular has always been a hero of mine, Ted Yoho. We have a pretty long history together. There's a picture. It's one of my favorite snapshots. I didn't have a beard at the time. As some of you know, I ran for county commission here in Alachua County, where I live, a couple of times. It's hard to be a conservative in this county. That right there is Congressman Ted Yoho in the white, and me. He wasn't congressman then, and me in the red. That is the primary night when Ted Yoho bested a field of about 5 or 6 people, including a 26-year incumbent Republican. Ted won by like 800 votes and eventually went on to be the congressman from the 3rd District of Florida. And that night, I won my primary, Republican primary, to be the candidate of choice for the Republican Party for a local county commission. And so we were celebrating together our victories of that particular night, and that's always a cherished picture. He went on to win. Me, I came up a little short, but I'm not running for from anything right now, and I'm grateful to be, because I've done a little of both, and I'm glad to be on it. But the progressive New York Democrat, talking about Ocasio-Cortez, was supposedly confronted by Ted Yoho over her views that joblessness and poverty have caused a surge of crime in New York City in recent weeks. True, right? A confrontation that was witnessed and recounted by a reporter of the Hill newspaper. Yeah, so it might be true. So, but what they're talking about is when Ocasio-Cortez, when she was asked about this on like a Instagram chat or something. I have to admit, I don't completely understand how those things work, but I'll get there eventually. But she was talking about defunding the police, and she was asked, what would it look like what would like New York City look like if you defunded the police there? And she said it would look like the suburbs. So in other words, these people that are, shooting babies in strollers and everything else in New York, all of that would go away if you just totally defunded the police department. And she went on to say that rich, and she was implying white neighborhoods, don't have to spend as much on policing, which is ridiculous. I guarantee you they spend an equivalent amount on policing, but they don't have to spend as much, and they have peace in their neighborhoods and everything else. So it's a lack. In her view, if you get her viewpoint, it's a lack of police in the suburbs that leads to the peace and quiet. And there's too many police in the city, which is leading to babies getting shot in strollers. It's ridiculous. And then she said in an earlier interview, she said that people who were out rioting in the streets were simply looking for bread. They couldn't pay their rent, and they were worried about their families, so they were looking to feed their children, and they were just out stealing bread, And oh, by the way, we'll just pop a cap in a 1-year-old baby in a stroller, on my way to get some bread. I mean, that's what ridiculous this nonsense she's putting out there. So I'm not surprised that Ted Yoho said to her that you're disgusting, which is apparently what he said. But defund the police, it's a suburb. So according to Ocasio-Cortez, if you take the police out of your neighborhood, it'll be a suburb. Well, maybe, I got to thinking about this morning, and maybe she's right, because we see, and they've become heroes of mine as well, the McCloskeys. And I keep showing this picture because I really believe this is going to be a turning point for people. The McCloskeys were in the suburbs of St. Louis when these peace-loving people came to burn their house down, tore their gate down, and they defended themselves with their AR-15 and whatever that 38 special that she's holding right there. And keep in mind, they didn't do this until after they called the police, and the police refused to come, so they did what anybody would do, defend their own home as best they possibly could. Because they knew if they left, they'd burn that sucker down. What do you think would have happened if they let the mob come into their home? What do you think would have happened? Would it have ended well for them? I doubt it very seriously. So maybe Ocasio-Cortez is on to something, that it would look like the suburbs. It would look like, that's what the suburbs would look like if you defund the police. You'd have to be defending yourself. And think about this. I cannot, just every time I think about it, it just irks the heck out of me. The McCloskeys called the police. The police didn't come until about 2 weeks later, when they came to take the very guns they were defending themselves with. That is progresso world, ladies and gentlemen. That is where we are headed if Joe Biden, Ocasio-Cortez, Elizabeth Warren, and, of course, Pelosi and that bunch, if they get their way, we'll all be defending our house. Like, we'll be clinging to our very freedom. But Ocasio-Cortez says, I never spoke to Representative Yoho before he decided to accost me on the steps of the nation's capital. This is what she tweeted out. Well, maybe you should have, Alexander. Maybe you'd actually get some intelligence if you had talked to Ted Yoho. Because Ted Yoho, man, I'm telling you, he is one of the finest people we've ever put forward in Congress. And it is a shame to a certain extent that we're losing Ted Yoho. If you don't know, I don't know if you follow the congressman's career, but he did something extremely rare in politics from either side. He actually made a commitment and stuck to it. Now, President Trump has done that, but Ted Yoho was elected before President Trump, kind of in the Tea Party way. Ted Yoho said, look, if I get elected to Congress, go look at that commercial. As I say, if you didn't hear me earlier, you want to see the best political commercial ever, all you got to do is Google it, or what Google is of the devil, Ted Yoho Pigs at the Trough commercial, and it's great. But in that commercial at the end, he says that I'm going to go to Washington and I'm only going to serve 4 terms, no matter what. And that's exactly what he's doing. He could have won re-election easily. There's no one who disputes that. And let me tell you, he was put under tremendous pressure to actually not keep that promise and stay up there. He was offered all kind of things, committee. I mean, I'm not going to give you too much information, but trust me on this. Ted Yoho was put under tremendous pressure, even here at home, from some of the people who just love Ted to, hey, they'll forgive you, just run again. And Ted, I'm sure he was tempted. I haven't really talked to him about it. I'm sure he was tempted to run because that political power is a very alluring thing, but he was true to himself, and I'm not surprised that he kept his commitment when he's going up in power. How many politicians actually leave office when they're just getting to the peak of their power? Ted Yoho is one, because he told the people, the voters of his district, that's what he would do, and that is a man of integrity. So he is going to be missed for multiple reasons. But you could learn a lot from Ted Yoho, Ocasio-Cortez. Back to this article. Apparently, Yoho called Ocasio-Cortez disgusting when they passed on the Capitol steps. When he walked past her on the steps of the Capitol on Monday, referring to her comments on the crime, on crime, what I just talked about. You are out of your freaking mind, supposedly Ted said. Now, I can see Ted say that. That sounds more like what he's accused of in a minute of saying. In response, Ocasio-Cortez told Yoho he was being rude and then kept walking. And you could make a case that he was, but he's probably just frustrated. Yoho was then heard by reporters saying, effing B. I think you can fill in the blanks. His office has denied he made those remarks. Now, that doesn't sound like something Ted would say. I got one of my producers that knows a little bit about Ted asked me that when we were talking about it before the show. That's out of character for Ted Yoho to say any curse words, certainly in public. That is out of character for him. But is he capable of saying it? Oh, well, no doubt he is. Does he probably feel that way? And I'm not pretending to speak for him. I think that there are millions of Americans that feel that way. Ocasio-Cortez reminds me of a local political figure back in the day, and I won't mention her name, but she was a county commissioner, and people asked me, what do you think about her and her supporters? I said, well, there's a group of people that would walk through fire for her to vote for her. There's no question about it. And there's another group of people that love to shove her in that fire and let her burn. And there are people, that is just what happens with Ocasio-Cortez. So I don't pretend to speak for Ted. Perhaps we'll get him on the show. He's been on the show in the past. I don't doubt that he feels that way, whether he actually said it. Here's the thing. Ted is not running for re-election. He probably feels a certain sense of freedom. He might have come a bit unhinged by all the crap that's going on. Who wouldn't be? It's very tough right now to look at what's happening and not totally speak your mind. I'm blessed to be able to do that on a daily basis, so I thank everyone for that. But Ted is someone who definitely speaks his mind. I'm sure he feels frustrated by what he's leaving behind. Not some things he's done a lot, but I'm sure he'd like to do more. But it's going to be very interesting to see how this comes out. And the fact that he is feeling a bit unhinged maybe leads me to this. They say that President Trump is unhinged, right? Well, Ted Yoho, if he said this, if he said this stuff, part of it could be that he doesn't have anything to lose because he's not running for re-election. So he's unleashed. He's Yoho unleashed. Well, I can't wait for 2020 to get through and we re-elect President Trump and he become President Trump unleashed 2020. It's just going to be very, very interesting. So kudos to Ted Yoho, man. I am sorry that you are leaving. I appreciate very much your commitment, your word to the people in District 3 and to me. And so Godspeed to you, Mr. Yoho. And I hope you don't have any ill effects from whatever this dust up is with Ocasio-Cortez. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the show today as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, like it and share it with others. Check out our sponsors link, if you will. People are always asking me how they can get in the fight. I tell you all the time that not everybody can be a fighter, but everybody can support fighters. And I'd like to think of myself and Billy Bob here as fighters. We could certainly use your help. So check out that sponsorship link. It's in the description on the Facebook intro. And you can go, and we have a sponsor right now, Big Daddy Unlimited. Let me just tell you quickly about them. Basically, they're all things Second Amendment, from outright selling guns and ammunition to tactical and everything else. So check that out. You can help me and help yourself at the same time. We're going to have more and more sponsors as time goes on. So I really appreciate you checking that out. I'll pray for your family. You pray for mine. Let's all agree that we can pray for this great United States of America. She deserves it more than ever. But above all else, like I say each and every day, from my heart, from my family to yours, have a blessed day.